Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my review of the hot new freshly released Seiko 5, the SRPK. Not only is it hot because it's the first Seiko to feature a dial that looks a lot like Tiffany blue, but it's also a long awaited 38mm version of the 5KX. Seiko took their time with this one though, didn't they? It was such an obvious release, and yet it has been more than 3 years since they launched the 5KX. Anyway, we're here now, but let's be clear about something from the beginning. The SRPK is not a replacement for the SKX 013 any more than the larger 5KX was a replacement for the old SKX 007 and 009. It may have very similar dimensions and form factor to the 013, but this is not a dive watch. Now, I struggled with that when the 5KX was released. I cried, but I've had 3 years to get over it. I'm over it. I think now we're all pretty much used to what Seiko have done with their lineups. Presages for dress watches, 5s for the shopping malls, and Pro Specs if you actually want something to go diving with. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I really enjoy my SRPE and my SSK even though they don't have ISO ratings. If I want that, I use my Arnie or my Tuna. It's fine. Now, you saw the pop-up today. I got a call earlier this week from Andrew at Watch Direct in Sydney. I met him when I bought those two G-Shocks a couple of months ago. He said he had just taken delivery of these new Seikos. Would I like one for review? I said, yes please, thank you very much. As such, I'll leave a link in the description to their online store. They have 3 different colour versions of the watch currently available for purchase if you live in Australia. He also gave me a discount code, JOMWA15, getting you 15% off the list price. It's not an affiliate code, I don't get a kickback, it's just for you if you want to pay a bit less for one of these. But is this thing worth buying? Let's flip the camera and find out. Alright, as it's all about size and colour today, I thought we'd start by looking at size and then move on to colour. That almost sounds sensible, doesn't it? So we'll get into the box, we'll do dimensions and specifications, kind of cover the basics, and then we'll do some side-by-side side comparisons, both in hand and on wrist, between this new SRPK and some other Seiko models that you may or may not be familiar with, including a couple of SKX to represent old Seiko and the SRPE and SSK models to represent these new Seiko 5s. Then we'll look at colour, have a good look at the dial, see if it is indeed Tiffany blue or something else. Then we'll discuss what you don't get with one of these new Seiko 5s, what is lacking from pretty much every single model across the range, before discussing what you actually do get. And then finally, swinging back to look at price again to see if it's actually worth it. That almost sounds like a sensibly structured video, doesn't it? So if you want a Seiko with this colour on the dial, it really has to be this Seiko at the moment, unless you're doing a mod build or buying someone else's mod build. That means you get it in the small form factor case. I said 38, I actually measure it at closer to 37.6mm in diameter, bang on 12mm thick though, with a lovely compact 44mm lug to lug. It does have the almost ubiquitous 20mm lug width though. Bit of a taper on this bracelet, down to just under 18 and back up to 19.5 at the clasp. Sized up for me now. I only removed 3 links. I guess this is not aimed at the big wrist brigade. If you've got a wrist much larger than 7 3/4 inches, it might not fit you on the standard bracelet. Sized up for me anyway, it weighs in at 128 grams. 316L stainless steel case crown bezel and bracelet, 100 meters of water resistance from a push-pull crown that is a flat hard-lex crystal, and this one features a 4R36 day-date movement. Now, I could show you shots like this all day long of the watch in glorious isolation, but it's probably not going to help you get your head around the size of this one, is it? So let's do some comparisons with other watches from the Seiko range, both past and present. Starting with a couple of new models. Now, I do not own a Seiko 5KX. I bought one and then sold it. I do, however, own a Seiko SSK, which is essentially a 5KX GMT, exactly the same case size and shape. This is what the two models look like side by side. It's a 42 and a bit mil case size on the SSK, and as discussed, it's just under 38mm on this new SRPK. This turquoise dial is the 33K one, by the way. Let's take the comparison watch down a little bit more by showing an SRPE instead, my two-tone. This one is 40mm. You can see what a 40 looks like next to that 37.6. Personally, I love this 40mm size, and I'm not quite sure why Seiko haven't released dive style watches with a rotating bezel in this size, but hey, maybe we'll get that in 2027 or thereabouts. I guess this is the side-by-side comparison that most people will be looking for in this video. The new watch next to the old SKX 013. Now, the diameter dimension is identical, but the old SKX is a little bit thicker and has a slightly longer lug-to-lug measurement. As I said in the intro, it's not a one-for-one replacement. It may look like it, but it doesn't quite function like it. And to round off our side-by-side comparisons, here is the SRPK once more, next to the old SKX 007, pretty much the same case shape as the SSK GMT, the 5KX, new Seiko 5 models. Perhaps you can see the horrendous chapter ring alignment on the old SKX. The new one, everything lines up quite nicely, I must say. What does that look like on wrist? Well, here is the SSK at 42.5-ish, here is the SRPE at 40, and here is the SRPK at 37.6. Obviously a noticeable step down and then step back up, but I've got an average 7-inch wrist. I could wear any of these comfortably, and I'll be honest, I'd probably be more inclined to wear the smaller than the larger, but probably best suited to the one in the middle. Alright, let's move on to colour then. Let's have a look at the dial and the hands of this new model. One thing I'm sure you've noticed already, the hands are gold, or at least the hour and minute hand are gold. The second hand is silver. The index surrounds, the applied indices are also silver today. Rather unusual combination. It's like they wanted to go gold, but then they pulled back a bit and decided to go half and half. It's unusual, but I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I reckon with this smaller model in this particular colorway, they're aiming for a unisex market and think that maybe gold hands might bring in a few more customers of the fairer sex without putting off gentlemen who might have been interested in it in the process. Time will tell on that front, I guess. In terms of the colour, it's not really one of those pale pastel blues. It's really a kind of greeny turquoise blue, this one. Perhaps a little closer to Tiffany blue than many of the watches purporting to copy that look. Couldn't be anything other than a Seiko, could it? That classic index and handset combination, the triangle at 12, oblongs at 6 and 9, circular indexes everywhere else, and a signature Seiko handset with needle second hand and lollipop counterbalance. The 4R36 gives it a day-date complication, which I must admit I do enjoy, especially on a watch like this, which is meant to be worn every day. The Seiko logo is applied. I'm used to the Superman S to represent the 5, and it's nice to see that automatic and italic script beneath the hand stack, carrying on the traditions of Seiko's past. Overall, I like the colour. I'm surprised that Seiko hadn't jumped onto this particular bandwagon sooner, but then again, it did take them nearly 4 years to shrink the 5KX, so perhaps that's unsurprising. So what do you get and what do you not get with one of these modern, contemporary, shopping mall-oriented Seiko 5s? Well, I'll tell you what you don't get sapphire crystal still. You only get a piece of Hardlex mineral crystal. Not nearly as rugged and robust as sapphire. It will scratch, it will scuff if you treat the watch roughly. You also don't get a signed crown, no Seiko S on this one. There is a burgeoning aftermarket of Seiko parts though if you want to tinker with it. I suspect most people that buy this won't, but there will be a few hardcore modders that do want to turn it into something that perhaps Seiko should have released it from the factory as in the first place. You don't get solid end links, those are hollow end links, definitely a throwback to the old SKX models, and the bracelet links themselves are also folded and therefore hollow. Perhaps another reason why this one comes in at under 130 gram size for me. That brush finish is also pretty rough, to be honest. You don't really get a decent clasp either. Pressed upper, pressed lower. It does have a Seiko fold over and security pushers, but only 2 holes of micro adjust. Now watch this size and shape, I would be wearing loose rather than tight. Chances are you're not going to get a great fit though because it only has those 2 micro adjustments. So that's what you don't get. What do you get? Well, you get a rather pleasant 120 click unidirectional dive style bezel on this one. It feels good. It feels pretty much like every other Seiko that I have operated. And as discussed, everything lines up on this particular model. You also get decent loom. Seiko's Lumibright is well renowned. I always rate it at about 7 out of 10. It's not as good as a good application of some Super Luminova, but it does a solid job every single time. No loom on the loom pip here though. This is a dive style watch rather than a dive watch. I've already talked about that a couple of times. But for everyday use, the loom is more than acceptable. You get a lovely smooth case profile and you get drilled lugs on this one. The bracelet is okay. I suspect a lot of people will be getting rid of it and putting this one on leather or rubber or something else, and you can do it nice and easily because of those drilled lugs. And you get a visible 4R36 movement through a display case back. It's also Hardlex mineral rather than sapphire, don't get excited. The 4R range of movements is Seiko's newer range of movements. They hack, they hand wind, roughly 40-hour power reserve, and a fairly rough set of tolerances between -30 and +40 seconds per day. But they are notoriously reliable. I must have seen 400 and I think I have had 2 duds out of the box. That's a really good hit rate. So if you like the size and you like the colour, do you like the price? $495 is the official RRP if you buy this one from Seiko here. As discussed, Watch Direct have them at $495, but with a 15% discount code, taking them down to $425. That's obviously a chunk better than $495, but it is still more than you'll pay for the majority of the 5 range here in Australia at the moment. For example, Watch Direct also have the older 5KX for $350, less 10%, so that's coming in at $320, $100 less than the new model. So then, how much do you like this new size and this new colour, and are you prepared to pay for it at the moment? If you've got the patience to wait for a sale or just to wait, these will probably come down to the same prices as the 5KXs over the next 12 to 18 months or so. So you'll be able to get 20% more off these than you can today. It just becomes a question then of how badly do you want it, and are you okay with buying a contemporary Seiko 5 given those inherent limitations of mineral crystal, push-pull crown and dubious bracelet quality. You can obviously get much better spec watches elsewhere for less money, but they won't have Seiko on the dial, and for many people that is still a big factor in the buying process. So there you have it. Is it worth buying? Well, if you must have a Seiko with a certain shade of blue on the dial, then go for it. If you must have a Seiko in 38mm, then go for it. Just know what you're buying and make sure you're comfortable with your purchase before you make it. If the price is a little too high for you today, come back in 12 months. We all know they'll be much cheaper then. While you are here, why not watch a review of another contemporary Seiko 5? Click here or here to do just that. Thanks for watching this one. I hope to see you again in a future video.